welcome everyone to the class of 1990 Giving Back panel. Good to see all y'all on here. Looking forward to having some others join us. I think everyone knows me. I'm Jonathan Steinberg. I'm got the honor right now to serve as class president, and I have a wonderful leadership team, many of them on here right now. And before we do begin, I hand it over to Rodney. It's always something I love to do is just give a quick recap of what's going on and what's to come here. So for all y'all, we know we've had a lot of great events over the past couple years or so. We've had the class author panel. I see Ashley is on here, so I remember that very well and the wonderful job she did. I also know of all the class events that we've had, such as the games night, the trivia night, which was different, and a few other things. And of course, with Lisa on here and Stacy, unfortunately, isn't. I don't see her name yet, with the newsletters that we get multiple times per year. So hopefully everyone's enjoying all the events and all the things that come into your email boxes. And of course, last weekend we had commencement at Brown, our 34th reunion. And while it was an odd year, it was actually kind of nice to see members of the class of 1989, who so many of us are friends of. And when you go on an off year, it's really great to see people that you don't see when it's an actual reunion year. But once again, we had the reunion class table in front of Font's house at Campus Dance. Once again, we marched with the banner. There's some photos, I'm sure, coming in the newsletter coming on that. So it was really good to see many of y'all at the commencement weekend last year. And we got a lot coming between now and next year's actual 35th reunion. There's going to be another panel in the fall focusing on the education sector, kind of continuing this whole giving back theme that we have for the class for this cycle, which is wonderful. Maybe a spring event, and obviously for reunion weekend itself, we're looking forward to hopefully hosting some community service event to kick things off. Obviously, the campus dance itself and all the cocktails associated with it. Already beginning to think about what to do for the class event on Saturday night. And then, of course, marching on Sunday. And just one quick thing. I think one of the highlights of last week, and I just want to share this with everyone, because this is a real kick I got. I had a chance right before the march on Sunday to meet who was the oldest person in the procession from 80 years ago. So the 80th reunion class, 101 years old. Her name's Lillian Affleck. And what was most impressive about her was not only that she was sharp as can be, she walked the procession route. So think about that nice steep hill, College Street going down. She had a cane, but she actually walked the darn thing. So I think, yeah, we all sit here and say, oh, we're all getting older. We're not even halfway to our 80th reunion, okay? So I think all of us need to set a target that, just like Mrs. Lillian, we're going to walk the course when we're all 101 or whatever years old. We all agree to that? Yeah, we're good? Okay, great. But by the way, just mentioning for reunion, for all y'all who haven't had a chance to see it, it's in the newsletters. For any ideas y'all have about what to do in the coming year, and particularly for commencement weekend, reunion weekend next year, please send those to brown1990leadership@gmail.com. I got that right, Lisa, correct? So brown1990leadership, it's one word, @gmail.com. It's probably on one of the emails as well. Okay, enough from me. I'm going to introduce Rodney briefly, and then he'll take over from here. So if y'all have had a chance to read the blasts and the newsletters, you already know Rodney probably anyway. He's the principal director of the Robinson Family Foundation, which does a lot of support work in the educational and social services sectors. And Rodney himself has had a lot of successes. He's worked with companies that we've already heard talked about briefly amongst us, Google, Yahoo, what's now Meta. And he has been on many different boards and advisory groups, very much in the education sector. And that includes working at Brown and even with President Paxson. So it's my honor not only to hand it over to Rodney, but to really enjoy the next 50 plus minutes with our panelists. So I thank everybody. Rodney, over to you, my man.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hello, class of 90 and Brown graduates. How's everybody doing? It's good to see you. I always smile. I actually wrote my Brown essay in high school about my smile, and I've never stopped it, but I'm super smiling to see all your faces because, we've all crossed paths many different times, and I'm totally pumped and excited to moderate this discussion tonight of our class of 90 famous people on giving back. And as Jonathan mentioned, we've done a few different things for the class so far. And we really appreciated the traction we've gained as we lead towards 20 25, which is hard to say. But this focus tonight is about giving back. And I wanted to ground ourselves with our Brown mission. And we may know the tune of our Brown song, and we may remember singing it directly on the steps of Sales Hall. But there's actually an accurate and written down mission of Brown University. I wanted to read it to everyone to help ground us in our conversation. So I'll read it. The mission of Brown University is to serve the community, the nation, and the world by discovering, communicating, and preserving knowledge and understanding in a spirit of free inquiry, and by educating and preparing students to discharge the offices of life with usefulness and reputation. So tonight's really going to be special because we have 4 great panelists that have lived their life of usefulness and reputation for themselves, for their families, for their communities. And I couldn't be more proud to introduce them in a second. I did want to also mention, if we look at the importance of giving back, some of us may have known in 1986 in September that what we wanted to do and how we wanted to give back to the world. Some may not have known until May of 1990, and some may have not known until the decades that followed. I know I certainly, when Greg and I went to start working in advertising back in 1990, we weren't really focused on giving back immediately, but he got the bug before I did, and I'm grateful and glad that I got the bug as well. So the great class of 1990 has created a solid legacy for our peers, our elders, and future generations. With that, we'll have each of my esteemed panelists introduce themselves, but truly in the Brown fashion. I'd like you to share your name, your pronouns, and mine are he and him, your first year unit. And first year is interesting because we all learned first year instead of freshman. My daughter was class of 22 from Barnard, and she called themselves freshmen at All Women's College. So I'm proud that we say first year. And your favorite Rhode Island and/or Providence food item. And so for me, my favorite food item that I didn't know anything about being from South Carolina was like those cinnamon donuts that are really big in New England, like cinnamon with apple cider. So that was my food item. So again, your name, pronouns, first year unit, favorite food item, and then talk a bit about your purpose, your initial purpose, as you kind of grounded yourself walking out of the Van Winkle gates. So it's going to evolve, and we'll have that discussion about how your purpose has evolved, but your initial purpose as you walk through the gates in May of 1990. And as a special bonus, today is June 2nd, we know that. Today, Brown sports team, I won't mention the team, won their 4th national championship. So don't say what it is if you know, but I want you to weave it into the conversation, okay? So we won our 4th. We won it. I'll give you a hint, Madison, Wisconsin today. And if you know the answer, my panelists, and maybe towards the end, if nobody else knows it, we'll figure out how we can weave it in the conversation. So we'll go in alphabetical order, and we're looking to look for Susie Friedland, or Susan Friedland now. She's a bit late to the call, but I have every confidence that she'll jump in, and we'll make sure she introduces herself. But with that being said, I'll go in alphabetical order. We've got Bob Atkins, that will do Greg Baldwin, and then Bill Fulton. So Bob, it's all on you.
Oh, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Rodney, and everyone for pulling this together. This is just a real treat to be able to sit here and reminisce a little bit. So my pronouns are he and him. And I was in the quad, and my favorite Rhode Island food, of course, is turkey tetrazzini. Yes, I don't know why I liked it so much. I'm not sure if it's a Rhode Island, New England, but just getting that in the anyway. So I left Brown with the intention of going to law school, and I started working at Butler Hospital. Got interested in healthcare, then I becoming a nurse and going to nursing school. And as you might have seen in my bio, I was a school nurse in the city of Camden, New Jersey for 5 years. And I know that we mentioned we're going to really say how Brown shaped our purpose, but Brown actually shaped my purpose, I think, in 2 ways. First, I did hear at some talk something along the lines of, if you want it bad enough, anyone can make money. And that stuck with me. And I think I also credit Brown with giving me, I don't think if I hadn't gone to Brown, I don't think I would have had the courage to go to nursing school. I wasn't, as many of you know, wasn't like, there's not a lot of men like go into nursing. And I think Brown really gave me, and being around just so many people who are just ready to just forge new paths. I think Brown just kind of said, yeah, you should do something extraordinary and different, and don't try to do something that's kind of like, yeah, anything ordinary. So I thank Brown for that. And I also thank Brown for just the amazing relationships that I made, the friendships that I made, that I'm still friends with some of these people. And actually got to see Jenny last summer, and it was actually 2 weeks ago with Bernard Muir out at Stanford. And just these people are just, that's probably like the biggest treasure I took from Brown, was just the people that I met: Sean Kirk, Josh Schiller, John Clough, Steve Hall, Jeff Humphrey. Just, yeah, I'm so grateful for Brown for that. So I'll pass it on. Thank you.
I'm next.
I think you're next, Baldwin. Baldy.
Nice, Baldy. Bobby, great to see you. Great to see everyone. It's so great to be here. My pronouns are he, him. Greg, class of 90. Archibald, pretty sure. Yeah, Archibald. Yeah, the quad. With Jay Abom was my roommate. Anybody remember Jay? And food, 100%. I mean, I was really introduced to the glory of a late night bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich from the truck. I mean, come on, incredible. I mean, the culinary delight that the truck was, that thing saved my life. Yeah, just kind of a sense of purpose. I definitely left Brown. I left Brown. We got recruited, me and Rodney, and I can't remember who. There was a couple other Brownies that went to Leo Burnett in Chicago. So I was going to make it big in the advertising world, and I was smitten with the power of a big idea to change our behavior. And then I got into advertising, and I definitely had my midlife crisis. So I think I've had less of a sense of purpose than I just had a crisis where I just couldn't stay interested in selling Keebler elves. I just wasn't that interested in the Citrus Bowl and like how much orange juice we could sell in the New Jersey tri-state area. And I tried, I really did. I was like, just come on, dude, just stick with it. You're gonna be fine. But that was a little breakdown I had, and I just couldn't shake it. And I left with another Brown grad and went and we read Kierkegaard and watched Star Trek for like a year on Cape Cod and tried to figure our stuff out with Tom Baker. That was our postgraduate studies. And that set me on a path, and I ended up promising myself only one thing after that, and it was whatever I did, I would be interested in it. And I find I'm interested in puzzles and challenges, and I was just never that interested in just making money as an interest area. So it left me free to explore a lot of other stuff. So I pass it on to Susan. Hey, just in time. Alphabetical. Oh, actually,
hey y'all.
Yeah.
Hey there, and again, Susan, you're up. You're right on time. Thanks for
Perfect.
coming. And we're gonna just your name, your pronouns, your freshman unit, your favorite Rhode Island, Providence, Brown food, and then your initial purpose in life.
Great. Well, sorry I'm late, y'all, but glad to have made it right on time, I guess. So hey, I'm Susan Friedland. I think it was Keeney Quad, but the thing I remember most about my freshman year is that, and I like to tell my kids this, my daughter is just about to start college herself. And at the time we didn't have our roommate. We couldn't pick our roommates the way they can now. So all we got was, a little card in the mail that said the name of your roommate and what your room was. And mine it was somewhere in Keeney Quad, but it said B32. I was like, what do you think B is? And it turned out it was in the basement. So my freshman year, I had a window, this big looking out into the feet of people walking by. But I guess it's been uphill since then. I loved that icy lemon thing they had in a cart. You guys remember that drink that you get in the summer?
Dells.
Yes.
What was it called?
Dell's Lemonade.
Dell's Lemonade. That's my favorite. And My freshman year pronouns, Susan, she, her. And I'll never forget, and this is kind of the beginning of my journey into nonprofit work. My freshman year, I took a class called City Politics with James Monroe. Anyone remembers? I thought I'd look it up before I came, but I didn't have time. But yeah, thank you. Dell's Lemonade, Jenny, thank you. And I've always, my whole life, I was really interested in kind of two overwhelming passions, the just social justice and the feeling of wanting to do something that makes the world better, and the built environment. So I was always interested in town squares and apartment buildings and architecture. And so my freshman year, I took that city politics class. I had thought I would probably be a lawyer. You know, I was a debater and always liked to win an argument. And I took that class and it made me realize, like, oh, actually, I want to do something that physically makes cities a better place. So I went and majored in urban studies. And then later I went to grad school in city planning, and I've celebrated my 30th year since I got a master's in city planning, and I've been building affordable housing since pretty much the day I graduated from college. So, so are we going into more than that, or we're just doing intros?
That's good for now. Just intros.
Okay, good for now. All right, cool.
Appreciate you. And we got Bill.
Hey, thanks, Rodney. Great to see everybody. Bill Fulton, he, him pronouns. I was in Unit 8 in the quad, and like Greg, I think the silver truck just changed my palate forever. I'd never seen anything like it or since. So, and pretty much the egg sandwich was great, but any sandwich really. So just any truck variety. And I think when I left the gates of Brown, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. There's something about the environment of classrooms and sitting in seminars just felt transformational. And so that was the kind of initial career that I went into, and it changed along the way, which I think we'll talk about. But I think Brown I will never forget from day one, just the sense of staying up at night, solving the world's problems, anything was possible. And I feel like we're just lucky that there was such a supercharge. I've never lost that feeling since then.
Well, appreciate it, Bill, and Greg and Susan and Bob. This is a great start, and let's jump into some of the questions. But we'll start still in Providence on College Hill, and talk please a bit about your current vocation. And how Brown may have given you that path to solve that problem. Bill, you talked about problem solving. Greg, you talked about puzzles. And certainly what we all remember from Brown is that we didn't go there to memorize anything. We went there to learn how to learn and to help solve problems in the world. So just your initial thoughts on, and we'll start with Greg, if you don't mind, on how Brown kind of prepared you to help figure out what the problem was and how you wanted to solve it and what you currently do.
So for the better part of the last 20 years, I was on the team, a bunch of mobbed up brownies, Jay Backstrand, Bob Savage, Teresia, were all part of an organization called VolunteerMatch.org. Chris Masto is a year in front of us, I think, is also on the board there. And Volunteer Match was really, I think, my effort to try to make Ross Chait proud of actually having been a public policy major. I think I did not make him proud when I went to advertising, Leo Burnett, and I kind of had a guilty conscience, I think, about going to Leo Burnett. He just gave me that look when I left, when I told him what I was doing, and I just couldn't ever shake it. And Volunteer Match was really an effort. It was the early days of the internet, and I think Brown gave me the courage, and it was just, pursuing my interests. This internet thing. And I remember going to the, I was living in Boston at the time, and I remember going to the Cambridge Public Library because they had a T1 line. And I was like, ooh, they got a pipe to the internet. And I didn't know what that meant, but I figured I would go over there, and, I logged on to Mosaic, and I just stared at it for a while. And I was like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And I think Brown was great at second guessing your, that you've got it all figured out. Because my first impression of the internet was pretty much like, I'm not really sure what to do with it, but I stuck with it. And it wasn't much long after when Jay called me and said, hey, well, let's build an internet site that would make it easier for people to find local volunteer opportunities. And that just kind of brought so many parts of my, my education, the public policy side of things. But public policy, we also studied, we spent a lot of time in the computer science center, thank God, because I never would have ended up in there even for 1 minute. And I remember having an email address and being like, what am I going to do with this? I mean, I could just talk to the people. They sit right next to me. It's just so stupid, electronic email. But it all kind of came together, and it was a 20-year amazing run, an amazing odyssey of kind of growing up a little bit with the internet and trying to put it to good use, helping local organizations recruit volunteers and help people find opportunities to get connected to things that they love. So it was amazing, and 100% I wouldn't have done it if I feel like Brown gave me the courage, it gave me the curiosity, gave me the confidence, and it gave me kind of the itch to do something that was worthwhile. So yeah, if I'd gone to, I don't know, maybe it would have worked out the same way. But when I think about why I'm doing it, I always think in my head a lot that Brown really set me up for opportunities like this where all the rules aren't already written.
Thanks, Greg. I like the why part, but Bill, why don't you jump in and give us your narrative?
Yeah, I mean, really, literally from day one on campus. I don't know if others remember that, sitting in on the green. I think it was one of the first nights of orientation and watching the Brown Eyes, Blue Eyes movie together, and then having the discussions. And just, as a kid who grew up in a big suburban, predominantly white high school, it just rocked my world. And I just felt like, I had missed so much about how the world actually functions and questions of justice and things like that. So that from day one, I just felt like it would change my trajectory of friendships and courses and interests. And I think that set in motion an interest. In junior year, I studied in East and West Germany in the exchange program, and getting a chance to live in East Germany, yes, it was a totalitarian state and, a terrible lack of freedom, but it was also the first time I'd ever seen a place where everybody had housing and food and a job, and there was no rat race. And then the semester in West Germany with all the freedoms, but, all the intractable problems of homelessness and income inequality. And it just felt like there in the middle of those two, we had erected a wall instead of a big table to figure out how do we get the best out of both of these worlds. And that set me in motion. Like, what would that other structure be? If it's the economic sphere has the market to organize it, the political sphere has the state. What structure organizes the church basements and the labor unions and the student dorms and these civil society structures? So, kind of came home obsessed by that. And a friend who was a forester and I would have late night conversations about, natural systems create these elegant canopies that allow everything to thrive, and human systems don't seem to do that. So that led to an interest in grad school later to kind of study, what do we know about collaboration? What do we know about possibilities of working together and solving problems? And from that, the Civic Canopy was created, which is the nonprofit that I get to work with the last 20 years. And it's essentially just creating these conditions where people come together to solve big problems. And, against the backdrop of the sometimes hopelessness of the headlines we look at, it just feels like under the right conditions, people regularly and reliably do amazing things. And I think that was all sparked by, late night dorm conversations at Brown, for sure.
I appreciate it, but I love the Canopy name and the analogy and seeing the forest through the trees. It's just a great way to name your company. Susan, give us a sense of tell people what you're doing now and how Brown kind of gave you that path.
Yeah, well, so I run a nonprofit organization that I've been at the head of for the last 20 years that builds affordable housing. We also own, operate, and provide resident services so our residents can thrive. And we serve low-income families, seniors, people who have experienced homelessness, youth aging out of foster care, veterans, really wide range of folks that are just completely left out of the marketplace of housing. And I guess I would say, I think what Brown really fostered in me was this, and it's probably true for all of you, this kind of sense of confidence in working with the unknown and working in collaboration, and just feeling this sense of not everything is going to be clear and not everything is going to be prescribed for you. and you have to kind of build planes as you fly them. And I think that in the world of affordable housing real estate development, it's an ever-changing landscape. It's very regulated, but it's also entrepreneurial. And it's been really satisfying and fun to be able to do something that I've really just wanted to do since my freshman year in college. And I'm one of those weird people that sort of stumbled on this career, and I love it to get to doing things like that, but it's also as I feel like probably most folks here too. It's grueling being an older and also serving a population that you're accountable and working in communities that you need to respond to. So kind of challenged from lots of different ways, but I do feel like Brown gave me just a lot of ability to write and speak and interact with folks and advocate and kind of strategic plan, which is just such an essential ingredient to the work. And I also just feel like really lucky. We talked about this a bit in the prep call that, I was like a smart enough high schooler, but I went to this college where I was just completely surrounded by incredibly creative, brilliant people, and to feel like I had something to say too, and I was really interested in listening and learning. I think just built a skill set that would have been hard to do in another environment.
Thanks, Susan. Appreciate it. Bob, what about yourself and current vocation and your path to get there?
Yeah. Well, a lot of aligns with what we just heard from my friends on the call. But I think one of the things that Brown really opened my eyes to, and I think Bill touched on this, was really seeing how important communities were. And I think, we did talk about on the call the Education 100 and thinking about Hope High School, and this community is just like really adjacent to Brown, a couple not even a mile away, very, very close, and just how much that matters. Zip code matters, community matters, neighborhoods matter. And also it got me very interested in thinking about youth and young people and the power and potential and ambition of young people in these communities that are being in some ways disadvantaged or just kind of like and it's Brown made me actually think about there's actually a two-way street here, right? So we are in some ways we're missing out on them as also they're missing out on kind of this wider society. So I think it's but in those communities we know there are people who are going to cure cancer or come with new financial instrument or there's just things that's on both sides. It's kind of like and I think that really made me think about, okay, what can I do in the world that's going to allow me to have a impact and influence communities and nursing. It never crossed my mind at Brown, but it just made a lot of sense. And I became a school nurse, and I started a youth development program in the city of Camden that I ran for a couple of decades. And I got to serve the Robert Johnson Foundation and philanthropy for about a decade. And right now I'm have the privilege of being at Johns Hopkins, and what my job is there is to really think about this profession of nursing, which is, I kind of got sucked into it. I just kind of fell into it, got lucky, but I think there's a lot of people out there, some of them graduating from Brown, that really want to be nurses. They just don't know it yet. And so part of my ambition and goal is to really be able to change the conversation around nursing. So we have these people that want to use their head and their heart and their hands and have this lens that nursing gives you to look at the world. I mean, it really changes how you look at things and how you think about scarce resources, how you think about community. So I'm really trying to, revolutionize nursing so that it's not such a big thing when a man goes into nursing or when somebody like comes from Brown and goes to nursing. People, ask, and I know a lot of Brown grads. Mike Gates, actually, I don't know if you guys knew Mike Gates, but he's in nursing too. There's a lot of people from Brown, but anyway. I do think we have this opportunity to really, if we change nursing, we change health and healthcare in this country. Nurses are the largest share of the healthcare workforce, and so Hopkins just has great resources, and I'm having a great time there.
No, appreciate it, Bob, and a lot of good themes here because I'm hearing, certainly not only helping others, but it gets down to I believe communities and people that have things and people that don't have things. So have and have nots, underrepresentation of certain groups and communities. And with that, I know if we could go back to Bill and Bob, and if the other two panelists want to chime in, Bill mentioned social justice as well. But from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, you're all in the spirit of giving back and helping others. How do you look at that specific lens? And you might say diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. But how do you look at that lens in terms of helping out people in Colorado and or Johns Hopkins or globally? So if you don't mind, let's start with Bill.
Yeah, and Bob, I actually want to build on something you said of the self-interest of social justice. It's not, so often it's framed as kind of a unnatural charitable act to care about people different than for oneself. But as you pointed out, like we all have a self-interest in a just society, that everybody has a chance to thrive, that it's not only the right thing to do, it's the pragmatic thing to do, to have communities where the next cancer cure is taken care of and has the pathway forward. And I feel like the work that we've done at the Civic Canopy of working with communities, it hinges upon what's often taken for granted in a business setting. You bring the folks that are closest to the problem to the solution table. That's where you're going to figure out the innovative ideas to solve the problem. They know the most about what the problem is. And so when those become the driving forces of the work, is people who have the greatest stake, who've got the most understanding. Historically, we've left them out of the conversation. Marginalized communities, folks that have often been the kind of had the brunt edge of disinvestment in cities, or divided by highways, or whatever the social injustice is. Watching, and it's true in rural communities as well. Folks that have most at stake in creating conditions of health unleash just amazing insights and possibilities because they're closest to the issue. And this would never be surprising in a business context, that you center the needs of your user or your customer, but somehow we forget to do that, and we invent all these complicated shoulds and oughts around all of this work. And I feel like the simple story is, when you go into communities and ask people, what do they care about? What kind of future do we want to have 25 years from now for our kids? It doesn't matter what their party is, doesn't matter what their race is, doesn't matter where they come from. People want the same things in that future. And we just don't have structures that naturally create conditions for people to come together on an equal playing field and develop those solutions. So I feel like what we've tried to do is think of all of those principles, inclusion, equity, justice, diversity, as the preconditions for getting the right solutions. And when you have them, that creates the environments where things really get unleashed, and it becomes a magnetic attractor to bring people back. They want more of that when they experience that kind of authentic human experience.
So the points that you brought out, Bill, I think really thinking about this opportunity to kind of convene people and bring them around to really work together to figure out a solution is, in a lot of ways, what we think about health now, right? As we move forward,
Yeah.
Realizing that health is so broad. It's not just kind of what happens downstream where you have somebody that ends up in the ER or the hospital, but all these things that happen upstream. We think about, and Susie's on the call, so we can talk about housing security and food insecurity and high school graduation. I mean, if you want someone to have a healthy and live a long life, get them to graduate from high school. And so this idea of thinking about these social determinants of health and the idea of equity, right? I mean, because you're not going to have an equitable and healthy and resilient society if you don't have individuals who are healthy. And health means being able to have steady employment and housing and being able to be in communities that are walkable and sustainable. And everybody wants that. I mean, the thing that really occurred to me when I was a school nurse in the city of Camden, for those who don't know, it's right outside Philadelphia, and it's just I mean, it's a city that has really been challenged in a lot of ways. But those kids that when I was in the middle school, for those 5 years, those kids were just like the kids I grew up with. They were just like the kids I grew up with. They were ambitious and funny and smart, but what they didn't know as they graduated from 8th grade is like there was all these barriers that were going to prevent them from getting the healthy and constructive adulthoods that we wanted. So I'm really just thinking about that. And that's an equity concern. I mean, that is really about equity. It's about how do we make space and make sure that everyone, I mean, because it's not just good for, again, for that community, it's good for democracy. I mean, we can't really have a democratic society if we don't allow or create the opportunities for others to, to be healthy. And health is just this really broad thing. There's health and equity and resilience. They're all connected. And it's just something that I think that stuff kind of like, I think the seed was planted at Brown. And I think I just, and even listening to Bill and others on this call, I realized like, oh man, other people got infected with that as well. So it's, and with Susie, everything she described, like, oh yeah, I didn't know a lot of things. And then I just kind of like fell into it, but it's, it's been really fun just to hear this call. So thank you.
No, appreciate it, Bob and Bill. And if anyone has questions, I know we have a small, tight group, but we'll certainly weave those questions in as well. And just to give you a sense of our roadmap for tonight, we're going to try to go for another 15 minutes, but there's so much to talk about and so much good stuff. I'd want to pivot because there's so much interconnectedness between what you all do. If you don't mind, Susan, to start about your biggest challenges and opportunities within the housing sector, whether it's national, California, wherever it might be. But how do you look at solving that problem and talk a bit about your challenges and opportunities?
Oh. And I want to build a little on what Bob said, looking at kind of the structures, the racism in the structures of our society and throughout history that have created kind of the marketplace and social constructs that we work in now. I think there's an amazing book that if you haven't read it, I really recommend, about housing, called The Color of Law. And it talks about kind of beyond redlining, how US housing policies have resulted in huge disparities in neighborhoods in terms of housing opportunities and health opportunities. And it's really cool. Color of Law, I highly recommend. But kind of the moment we're in, where racial equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives are really hopefully causing just a lot of new thinking on what is structural about the systems we work in, looking at housing sort of as an opportunity for us to look at our own organization, because we develop housing, we're also landlords. So what are our policies and procedures that we've had over the years that may have had outcomes that aren't as just as we would want? We've been looking a lot at like, how do we make our applications available? How do we screen folks? What kind of reference checking do we do? Like, how do we create more pathways for folks to live in our housing rather than be excluded from our housing? So that's kind of some of the work we're grappling with. But I think it's also just kind of, I feel like I have a real privilege because my organization, we have 260 staff, and we have maintenance folks, we have accountants, we have real estate developers, we have asset managers and property managers, and it's really the most diverse environment that I've had the privilege of working in. And so kind of being a leader in an organization that has such diversity, countries of origin, primary languages spoken, socioeconomic backgrounds, educational level, I feel like some of the awareness that I learned at Brown, while very rudimentary and in its earliest stages, has really helped navigate and lead an organization that one of the things I feel most beholden to is to be a great employer. Like, our mission is great and we need to fulfill our great, but are we walking the walk internally as an organization? Are we creating the structures and equity for our staff so that they could be their best selves? And kind of almost coming back to these social determinants of health, are our employees able to thrive given the pay, given the benefits, given the opportunities? How do we create that ecosystem in our own organizations? I think that's a really important and interesting challenge.
No, thanks, Susan. And I hear you saying servant leadership, and we have to enable everyone else to thrive on our team so we can serve others, which is awesome. I appreciate it, Susan. I want to pivot to Greg, and I'm going to give you the visionary question. So obviously 20 strong years at VolunteerMatch, connecting people with services and helping others. Where do you see the next 20 years? Whether it's scalability, whether it's AI, where do you see your sector and or nonprofit service organizations in general going the next 20 years, and what kind of magic potion do you need to make sure that we can get to all 330 million people in the US and beyond?
That's a great question. I mean, big picture, VolunteerMatch, what interested me most about VolunteerMatch was how do you use technology in ways that are, pro-social, are actually bringing people together and driven by a logic that isn't singularly focused on economic gain. And it was a great sandbox to play in, because it's it's just absurd to think that you would try to get super rich by facilitating people volunteering. Like the whole idea of trying to get rich by helping people get connected to things that they love and do it because it's important to them, not because this is how they're earning a living. So I think when I think about the future of the nonprofit sector in general, I think I continue to puzzle on, and I'm sure all of us in some way are, how do you create these ecosystems that can drive real change that aren't driven by the singularity of profit and gain? Like, I'm not against markets, but I've been in the space long enough to see that marketplaces don't produce equitable outcomes without some interventions from something from the outside. Left alone, markets are pretty predictable. They will, they'll aggregate power into the hands of a few, and will produce extraordinary things. But those things are not necessarily equitable. And I think the big challenge, and maybe every generation has to fight this, is how do you keep organizations moving in directions that are driven by purpose, that are driven by hope, that are driven by faith, that are driven by all these other qualities that we have, that aren't simply about generating money, but also do it in a way that aligns enough with our economic system that you don't have these kind of two choices, either fully subsidized by government or, fully run by the marketplace. I think the social sector, civil society, the nonprofit sector is the place where we have the freedom to explore other ways of staying organized, and not just explore them, but invest in them, lean into them, and live our lives. How do you continue to do that at scale so that the sector doesn't just kind of vanish? In a lot of places, you only, I think what made America great at one point was this idea that we have a space between government and the marketplaces. And I think that space is always at risk. It's fragile, and it needs, it needs all of us to continue to support it and understand it, and contribute to it if it's going to be around from 20 years.
Appreciate it, Greg. And yeah, I want to say, any of the panelists can go back to this next question, but to that, what you just said, Greg, is so important, because we don't want our society to be a zero-sum game. We certainly want equity and equitable distribution of all services and help and wealth to everyone. At least that's my point of view. But I think in the nonprofit sector, it's about helping others. And so as we have that balance of government and the marketplace, how can we make it a non-zero-sum game? So with that in mind, we all remember, I think it was the basement of Pembroke or Alumni Hall, the investment banks would come in and recruit in 1989, in the fall of 89, right? And so that Shears and Lehman would come in and Goldman Sachs would come in and talk about, you got to work 80 hours a week, you got to work all weekend, and maybe you'll do a big deal and do some big M&A and become rich. So what would you tell the class of 2028, the first year student today, to say, okay, I got my student loans, I've gotten through Brown, it's 2028. What do I do next? What would any of you tell that student about how to live their life and live their purpose in light of real world issues of paying student loans? So anybody want to take that on?
Wow. Well, first of all, I think that young people these days don't want to work 80 hours. I think they have, I think, a different set of values coming out of COVID, coming out of whatever they've experienced, that I don't think they're going to have those same kind of, also their student loans are bigger. So, but to me, I feel like my advice would be, I've done one thing, but you don't have to do one thing. Like, you can, I just see a lot of joy in serving on boards. I think we talked a little about that at the prep call, volunteering outside of your main job, but don't put so much pressure on yourself that everything has to be right. I think that kids are worry. There's more anxiousness about like what choices am I making, and I hope they can also just find joy and travel and move to a new city and give it a whirl, you know?
Anyone else? Thanks, Susan. No, it's certainly
What would you tell them, Rodney?
well,
Yeah.
with a 24-year-old and 26-year-old daughter, I've seen it firsthand in terms of them coming out of school kind of with that core purpose of saying, we need to make this world equitable and good for everyone. And so I have two daughters and loved them both, and they had different experiences than we had at Brown. But most proud of, for example, my youngest led the biggest protest march 4 years ago last week after the death of George Floyd in Evanston, Illinois. 10,000 people followed 7 women on this march through the city of Evanston, Illinois, and she wouldn't tell me or any adults what the route was. And this is right after Charlottesville. So I'm freaking out as a parent. But they got it done. They walked through the town. The cops helped them out, and they got to a nice speaking engagement and had the crowd focus on others and not on obviously things that would be detrimental to humankind. So I really do think and agree with you, Susan. This generation is thinking about society differently, thinking about more balance, and I think that's going to be good for us in the long term.
That's
Again,
nice.
any questions? Somebody
Nice
else?
work, Rodney.
Well, yeah, but
You should-
I give their
is it
mom
too late
credit.
to get them on the panel?
I know I give their moms the credit. But I do want to ask too, from a nonprofit sector, we all know its resources are limited. Resources can be constrained. And so what are some things that you all would need or help, what does help look like in your sectors? Anyone can take this on to make sure that we can scale and help flourish to help more people. Bill?
Well, I'd start with, like, we use the metaphor stone soup all the time, working with communities of often, when you come into whatever the presenting issue is, feels overwhelming, underfunded, impossible to do. And it is, if it's a mental health crisis, you probably need services you don't have and facilities that aren't there. And, but when you bring folks around the table and start to peel back the onion a little bit. Well, tell me a little bit more about really what are the issues you start to realize that there are assets in the community that they didn't think of as resources, expertise or, underutilized beds at the assisted living center or, whatever it might be. And like that children's story of stone soup, once someone creates a container and says, we're doing something big together, it seems to be this magnetic attractor that draws additional resources and possibilities and literally energy from the group to address things. And as people start to pool those resources, I can't even tell you the number of times that itself will attract additional funding. People like to invest and fund things that are working, that have momentum. Now we need to do all the things that I think Susan was talking about. We need to address all the structural inequalities and figure out how to adequately finance our communities. But I find more often than not, people are, in the absence of really systemic solutions, they forget that we will only get those by coming together and mobilizing and connecting the dots. There's not a community in Colorado that isn't struggling with affordable housing or food systems, inequities. And so kind of the next level of our efforts in our organization is how do you connect the dots between all those networks of networks and build the power we need to change the policies and the funding cycles. So I think we have to kind of not wait for those larger systems to change, but change them by coming together and kind of pooling the resources we didn't even know we had. And that sounds Pollyannish, but it happens all the time.
No, but Bill, could I just, Bill, I think so much that I've seen that also in the work that I've done with communities, but I think to your point, this change is also thinking about, if we want to change the narrative, we have to change the narrators, and how do we really create these kind of pathways to bring other voices, into the conversation that wouldn't be outside. We definitely saw that in health. I mean, we used to think about health, it was the doctors and nurses and public health and everybody else, but we realize now we have to bring in mayors and teachers and, librarians and all these others. So that's one piece but I think this, we know change happens at the speed of trust. And so the way we can, like, how do we create trust within communities? How do we kind of like build this trust? And obviously, I think nurses have an advantage because we're one of the most trusted, professions in the world. But yeah, it's really thinking about building trust and how do we kind of like build that trust and then change those narrators, get those different voices, because they do have, people are bursting with ideas, and if you set them up, facilitate the conversations, that's all ever. Just set up the conversation, create the table, get the people around the table, and they will figure it out. And so much what you said, Bill, just resonated because I've seen it. I'm like, yeah, I didn't think we're going to figure this out, but we definitely saw with the pandemic. We figured out a lot of stuff with the pandemic, and we didn't know we were going to be able to figure it out, and that was a lot about thinking about getting them people with these different ideas, this, marketplace of ideas around the table. So.
Absolutely.
I have one more, but anybody else want to chime in on this topic?
I guess I would just say I think that government sector and academic sector have often not been seen as like a sort of fecund place for new ideas. But if the right people are in those positions, they can be. And I've seen it a lot with housing innovation in the state of California. Things were really stuck in an anti-growth mode for decades, and kind of a combination of a lot of land use reform changes that finally had some political will to happen at the state through elected officials and staff working behind the scenes with support from academia really changed the dial on quite a few things lately. And it just took 30 years of like political pressure and kind of change in attitude, but it's possible. And in ways I never really thought could happen.
I appreciate it. Go ahead.
Just to follow up on that. I think I spent 20 years at VolunteerMatch, really feeling like my public policy degree taught me, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and top-down change never works. Which is like, those are like, it's hard to go and like feel like I spent most of my time feeling like we were trying to solve things that government couldn't. But I've come to see that, like, the advice I would give to the next generation and even to folks who are like just starting to pay attention to kind of the political issues as they intersect with social issues, that's going to happen a lot more. And all of the significant change is going to come if you can get the three sectors lined up. It's really hard to make change happen just as a nonprofit organization or just as government or just as business. And I feel like those, Civic, Canopy, I feel like Bill's, way out in front and understanding that until you can get people collaborating across the sectors, it's really hard to change anything. And so, be aware of that. And whatever you do in whatever sector you're operating in, be looking to reach out to collaborate with others, because you can't really make the big change happen unless you get everyone, unless you can get change working across sectors. Otherwise, you just rage against the machine.
Absolutely. And again, everyone, it's also great common themes, because whether it's the Brown curriculum or it was called the new curriculum when we were there, I'm sure Ira Magaziner had an uphill fight to change that in the early 70s, but he did change it. And then I remember when in a prep call season, we talked about Professor Feldman, and I remember the class, the liberal arts approach to urban planning. And so you learn a lot of different ways to solve problems and bring different entities together, whether it was city politics with Poli-Sci 22, Professor Marone, or whatever it might be. It's all, as you said, Bill, and others, connecting the dots and making sure that we can bring different constituents together to solve the problems that we have. With that, I did want to add one kind of quip, and if anybody wants to add to kind of the legacy, and not to be morbid, but if I had to tell a student today at Brown how to live their life, and I do give the credit on this example to Charlie Munger, along with Warren Buffett. But Charlie Munger said this at the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting. They said, well, what advice do you give us in the world? A little person, a young woman asked the question. She was 8 years old. How should we live our life? What advice do you have for us to be like you? And, pretty innocent question. And the answer was very, very simple, but very telling. It was nothing to do about money. And certainly, literally the answer was, write your obituary and then go live that life. And so create whatever legacy you want, and that's what you want to dream, that's what you want to envision, and then go live that life. And again, I'm just so proud of the class of 90 and my panelists for helping out and thinking of that purpose in life, whether it was 1990, 2000, 2005, it doesn't matter when it was, you did it. And we're so just happy and proud and grateful that you all have found a way to help others and to fulfill the mission of our life of usefulness and, excuse me, and reputation. So I want to thank Bill and Greg and Susan and Bob and the committee of the class of 90 with Jonathan, especially Jenny Backus, on helping to coordinate and herd all these cats, because we're a bunch of cats here on these calls. But it was great to bring it all together, and certainly with Joan and Elena and everyone else. I know Chris Sales is on the call. I saw Geet on here earlier. But oh, and Kim, hey Kim, how are you? But it's just great to have us have the same commonality of saying we want to do something to make an impact and to help others.